Whenever somebody makes a moral claim, they are presupposing an objective moral law that everybody is obligated to follow. In the Christian or theistic worldview, the reason is because, first of all, God is the one who has established that order for us, and this is something that is unique to the theistic worldview: accountability. I mentioned in the previous video that, if you pull a couple strings here and there, if you're willing to grant, a few things in favor of the atheistic worldview, the more naturalistic, non-God world, you can somehow, come up with ways to say, yeah, there is an objective moral standard for everybody because, convenience. What is the best for the survival of our species? But then how do you answer the question of, well, why exactly should I care about, the survival of my species? Why exactly should I really care for the well-being of my fellow human? This is something that is unique to the theistic worldview. The whole idea around accountability. So not only is there a moral law, but one day you're going to be held responsible for how you dealt with that moral law. How well did you follow it? How did you treat your fellow human being based on the standard that God has placed on you and that is placed on your heart? We can fight all day long about, if there's objective morality, is there not objective morality? But the truth is that, this is a very easy way I can put it. Nobody calls a line crooked unless they have an idea of what a straight line is. This is something that I see oftentimes when people complain about hypocrisy in the church. They complain, I grew up in the church my whole life, but, everybody was one person on Sunday and the other 6 days of the week they were another thing. And that's a completely valid, really, honestly, I'm saying this honestly, as a Christian, that is a perfectly valid, reason to be concerned about, how these people are living their lives. But from an atheistic standpoint, so what? Why should we care? Why should you care? Why should you really even be offended at people being hypocritical? Is what they preach really worth living? Because, for example, we have civilizations like, for example, the Aztecs, that they would literally cut open people and sacrifice their hearts to the sun god so that it would rise every morning. That was part of their religious practice. If they were preaching it but not practicing it, if imagine they were preaching that, we should sacrifice humans, but then they were not actually doing it, would you complain to them that they were not practicing what they preach? I don't think you would, and I don't think anybody would. If someone is complaining about hypocrisy within the Christian church, unknowingly, they're actually admitting that the Christian standard of living is a life worth living. Or else, why would you be so angry that people are not following it? And and we can fight, like I said, we can fight all day long about what is right and what is wrong. But honestly, when it comes down to it, everybody has this inward notion of what is right and wrong. From the Christian standpoint, we know where that comes from, but from the atheistic standpoint, you really have to guess, where exactly does this come from? How do you know that it's wrong and right? And then even if you can come to the conclusion, okay, yeah, fine, I agree that this is right and this is wrong, so what? Why should I follow it? People always make these complaints about, why does a good God permit evil in the world? The Christian worldview is very simple about this. Evil is not an entity in itself. We have this very warped notion, mostly thanks to, mainstream media. You have God on one side and Satan on the other, and they're these two equals, constantly fighting against each other, the yin and the yang. Sin in the Christian worldview is not like the opposite of God. It's not, like the anti, it is the absence of God's goodness. Even, the Bible uses the word Satan or the Satan, the adversary. He's not really for evil. We assume that the devil is trying to bring evil to the world. The fight is not really against us. It's against God. Whatever God is, if he is good, the absence of good is what we call evil. In the same way how you cannot really measure darkness in itself. Darkness is not something you can measure in a laboratory, but you can measure light. Darkness is simply the absence of light. And the same thing, I remember back in high school, I was shocked to realize that there was really no such thing as cold. Especially coming from Canada, that was very difficult for me to believe. And so my teacher said, no, we measure, the Celsius, which is what we use here in Canada, and I understand in the United States they use Fahrenheit. We use the scale to measure heat. What we experience as cold is simply the absence of heat. You can always increase heat, but there's only a certain point when you will eventually reach what is known as absolute zero, where you literally cannot go any colder. Good and evil is very much the same way. We have a God who is infinitely good, and in the absence of that good is what we call evil. Whenever you're making something more evil, all you're really doing is just removing the goodness that God gives. God is infinitely good, but there's no such thing as something that is infinitely evil. And the Bible talks about a day of judgment. Not only the Bible, but all theistic religions believe that someday you and I will be held accountable for our actions before God. And the atheists can complain all day long about evil in the world, the existence of evil and all that stuff like that, and why is God good. In the Christian worldview, and look, we're living in the 21st century, and you have the average internet atheist that thinks that this is some new revelation and this is going to somehow destroy Christianity. Do you not think that for the last 2,000 years you've had at least a few people who thought of the same questions as you do? Who have also wrestled with the notion of a good God and yet the existence of evil? They've realized that the Christian worldview provides hope. First of all, it gives the story of how sin entered the world, and that was the root of death. Sin, through one man's sin entered the world, and death through sin, as the book of Romans says, for example. And we have God who, instead of ignoring our difficulties and ignoring our evil, ignoring, the pain that we suffer, he suffers with us. A very common misconception that you hear even in the church, God is with you. We assume, that means that God is going to take away our problems. Eventually he will, and we believe that God will eventually restore order into this world. But what we believe is that Jesus Christ, who is God incarnate, suffered with us. So where is God in the midst of suffering? He is alongside us. And he gives us hope because he suffered through it, and he says, in this world, you will have tribulation. There is never a promise from God of an easy life. But he says, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. We believe that Jesus, through his death and resurrection, has already defeated the power of sin and death. And he will come again to restore order. And so any complaints that we have as Christians about evil, God will deal with. We believe in a just God who will punish and do away with all evil. Meanwhile, on the atheistic side, where is the hope of ultimate justice? So we are born into this world, by chance through, the means of natural selection and evolution. And then we have this instinctive desire to survive and to reproduce. And so we do what is quote unquote right. We live our lives the quote unquote best way we can, whatever definition you wish to put on it, which, by the way, no one is obligated to follow. You are more than welcome to hold to your own moral standard and your own moral values. But if you live in an atheistic worldview, you have no right to tell anybody else what they should do, how they should think, what they should say. Because in the same way how you have all the right in the world to believe what you believe, everybody else also has that same right. And so you can say, murdering children is wrong. You're more than welcome to believe that and to, not kill kids. But who are you to tell your neighbor to do the same thing? He says, well, maybe in your worldview, in your little context, in your little bubble, that's wrong or right for you and good for you. But guess what? It's convenient for me. So I'm gonna follow my own subjective morality. In the atheistic worldview, where will the ultimate justice come from? The very honest answer is none. In fact, I would even go as boldly as to say that the only consistent atheistic life would be a nihilistic life, where literally nothing matters. Your life doesn't matter, my life doesn't matter, do whatever you want. Because eventually you're gonna die, you're gonna go back to the dust, your existence will have been nothing. Only in the Christian worldview, you have a God who suffered with us, and as a result, through his death and resurrection, he will restore everything that was lost because of sin and death. Where is your hope?